Hello, and thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking about the VLOOKUP function in Excel. So to get started, let's just go over the data that we're going to be using. Here I have 3 columns, and if you notice I have some letters, some numbers, and some various names. Also, I have right here the value I'm going to be looking up. So to get started, what we want to do is we want to go to our ribbon, we want to go to Formulas, and we want to look under Lookup and Reference. We're going to scroll down to VLOOKUP. Now the first thing we're asked is, what is the value we actually want to look up? In this case, I'm going to reference a cell. I'm going to reference this cell right here, and I'm going to hit F4 to make it an absolute reference. The next thing we're asked is to give a range for a table array. Table array is just a fancy way of asking where we want this function to look for our information. So I'm going to go ahead and select our data set. And again, I'm going to hit F4 to make it absolute. The thing to keep in mind is that the VLOOKUP function only looks in the leftmost column. And in order for this to work properly, that leftmost column must be sorted in ascending order. And the next thing that we're asked is the column index. So here we have our data set, the table array, and it's saying once it's found the value that we're searching for, what column do we want to have the return value come from? So in this case, if I'm looking up a number, do I want to return a letter or a name? I'm going to go ahead and tell it column 2, so we return a letter. The last thing it asks is, when it searches for a value, will we allow it to substitute a value that is less than or equal to? And we're going to go ahead and tell it yes by saying true. Otherwise, it will only look for a value that's an exact match. If it doesn't find a value that's an exact match, then it will return an error. So that's what happens if we set it to false. So here we have our function already plugged in, and if I change this, we go down to 8, we look over, and we see that it's listed I. If I go here to punch in 10, we see that the letter P is referenced. Now what I can do is I can also change the column index. So if I went ahead and I changed this to 3, it's going to return the 3rd column in the data table. Alright, if I go down to 16, there we go, it's returning the 3rd column in our data set. Again, though, it's still only looking in our leftmost column. So the next question we need to ask ourselves is, what happens if we select a value that's beyond our max range? So our max range right now is 17. So I'm going to type in 20. Again, because we set this value, this last value to true, this last argument, it's going to go to the value that is less than or equal to, and it's going to return a value from there. Now, again, let's say we have 9 and 10, and I'm going to punch in 9.5. All right. It goes down to 9. We don't have a 9.5, so it stops there at 9, which is less than or equal to 9.5, returns the value of William. So the last thing we want to find out is, what happens if we go here? We have our value, our minimum value in this data set, or in this leftmost column, is 1. So what happens if we go to 0? We get an error. Okay, so for the sake of comparison, we have 2 identical functions, 2 identical VLOOKUP functions. The only difference is this last argument of whether or not we're going to accept a value that's less than or equal to. One here is true, the other one is false. So here I've selected 7, it's returned the same value. If I go ahead and I select 9, same value. Now watch what happens whenever I put in 11 and 11.5. Notice the one here with the false value requires an exact match. So it looked for this value. This 11.5 was unable to find it, so it returned an error. Whereas the one where we accept a value that's set to true, a value less than or equal to our search value, it goes down to 11, doesn't quite find 11.5, 11 is less than or equal to. Okay, so far we've been working with these functions and our column index and our final argument of whether or not we'd accept values less than or equal to. We've actually been typing those in, but the truth is those can be dynamic by referencing them to cell values. So for instance, the column index, I've gone ahead and I've put here. The final argument of what we're going to accept, a matching set, put here. And if you notice, here we've punched them in like our cells we've actually typed in. Here we're referencing the column index. So if I go ahead and I reference 3, all right, notice those change. And if I set this equal to false, and I'm going to put in 7.5, which is not listed here. All right. So there we go. So just to let you know, these arguments of where we want to look up, the lookup range, and the column index, those can be dynamic as well. So that helps make the VLOOKUP function a lot more versatile and a lot more dynamic. Okay, so we've been talking about the vertical lookup function, and what I'd like to do is briefly go over the HLOOKUP function, which is just does the same thing as the vertical lookup function, which works with columns, and we're going to look at the horizontal, which works with rows. Now, here we have another data set, but this time it's arranged horizontally. So we're going to be working with rows instead of columns. The truth is that a lot of the rules that we use for a vertical lookup function apply to the horizontal lookup function. Instead of a column index, we have a row index, if you can see that here. Instead of working with our leftmost column, we are now working with our topmost row. So just like the vertical lookup function, the horizontal also has similar limitations. Which row do we want to return is going to be in the row index. Same thing with the true or false argument, if we'll accept values that are less than or equal to our search value. And again, our table array is going to look in a topmost row, and even those must be listed in ascending order from left to right. So those are things to consider whenever you're working with our HLOOKUP function. So here we have a row with numbers, another with letters, and again names. And if I go ahead and I change this value, I'm going to change it to 7. And I'm going to say our return column is 2. We're going to go ahead and change that to 3. And if you notice here, I have the same setup as I did before. Here I have the values actually for return column, or I'm sorry, return row, and whether or not we'll accept values less than or equal to. I've punched those in. Or I can have them referenced to cell values, which are listed up here. So as I change these, if I want to, I can go ahead and go back to 2. Notice these will change to letters, and if I go ahead and I put in 7.5, those that will accept values less than or equal to have the true statement or have the true argument at the end. Notice that they do not give us an error. So, all right, I hope you have a better understanding now of the VLOOKUP function, how it works, how to use it, what some of the limitations are, and basically how to be creative with your own use of it, and also some insight into the HLOOKUP function. So if you found this video useful, please click like and share with others. Thank you.